Hi, this is Her Voice Unfiltered, where the words don't ask for permission, they just arrive. I'm Michonne, poet, healer, storyteller, and this right here, this is where we feel it before we fix it. So, let's put some feeling to these words. Now, earlier this week, we talked about what it means to choose yourself in the quiet. Not when people are watching, not when the world applauds, but in those small, everyday moments when you decide your peace matters too. We talked about solitude, healing, boundaries, and the journey back to yourself. Today, we're continuing that conversation the way I know best, through poetry. Because sometimes there are feelings that don't fit neatly into a conversation. Sometimes the heart says things that only poetry can translate. This collection of poems is for anyone who has ever felt overlooked or abandoned themselves while trying to save everyone else, struggled with loneliness, or wondered if they could trust themselves again. These poems follow a journey. A woman who chooses herself, a woman who learns to sit with herself, a woman who apologizes to herself, and finally, a woman who learns to trust herself again. So wherever you're listening from, I invite you to take a breath, settle in, and stay with me for a moment. This is choosing yourself in the quiet. Let's begin. Nobody clapped. Nobody clapped when she stopped answering calls that cost her peace. Not every ringing phone deserves access to you. And not every person deserves another chance to interrupt your healing. Nobody clapped when she stopped confusing being needed with being loved. For years, she thought they were the same thing. She thought being the strong one meant she mattered. She thought carrying everybody made her valuable. She thought exhaustion was proof of love. It wasn't. Nobody clapped when she realized she had become storage for things that never belonged to her. Other people's expectations, other people's disappointments, other people's fears, other people's unfinished healing. Somehow, she became responsible for carrying burdens they refused to unpack themselves. Nobody clapped when she put the weight down. Nobody saw how heavy it was. Nobody knew how tired she had become. Nobody clapped when she stopped calling loneliness an emergency. That one took time. Because when you spent years surrounded by noise, peace sounds unfamiliar. Silence sounds suspicious. And solitude feels like punishment. Until one day you sit with yourself long enough to discover that loneliness says something is missing, but solitude says something is growing. Nobody clapped when she stopped chasing people who had already made their decision. Nobody applauded when she stopped auditioning for spaces that had already decided they couldn't hold her. Nobody handed her flowers for choosing herself, for going to bed, for drinking the water, for taking the walk, for protecting her energy, for saying no, for praying instead of panicking, for healing instead of hiding. Nobody clapped, but heaven noticed. God noticed. And eventually, she noticed. She noticed the peace. She noticed the strength. She noticed that she was laughing again, breathing again, dreaming again, living again. Nobody clapped when she finally went home. Not to the house, not to the city, not the address, but herself. The version of her she abandoned while trying to save everybody else. And maybe that's the thing about healing. The biggest victories rarely happen on stages. They happen quietly, in prayer closets, in parked cars, in early mornings, in tear-stained journals, in decisions nobody else will ever understand. Nobody clapped, but she kept going anyway. And that was the miracle. The thing nobody tells you about choosing yourself is that eventually the noise leaves. The phone rings less. The distractions fade. The people who only benefited from your exhaustion find someone else to borrow from. And then one day, it's just you, your thoughts, your healing, your peace. At least that's what I thought it was, until I realized I knew the sound of an empty house all too well, even when there were people living in it. Which brings us to poem number 2, The Sound of an Empty House. I know the sound of an empty house all too well, even when there are people living in it. I've heard it in marriages, in friendships, in families, in rooms filled with conversation where nobody was really talking. I've heard it in houses full of furniture and hearts full of distance. Because empty has never really been about space. Empty is about connection. It's the silence between two people who stop trying, the hallway between closed doors, the unanswered question that hangs in the air for years, the tension nobody names, the love nobody expresses, the apology that never arrives. I know the sound of an empty house. It sounds like loneliness wearing company as a disguise. It sounds like sitting beside someone while feeling miles away. It sounds like eating dinner together without ever being seen. It sounds like surviving instead of living. For a long time, I thought the answer was filling the house. More people, more conversation, more distraction, more noise. But noise has never cured loneliness. It only delays the introduction. Because eventually, the music stops. The guests leave. The phone gets quiet. And there you are, face to face with yourself. And that's when I learned something. An empty house and a peaceful house can sound almost identical. At first, both are quiet, both are still, both leave you alone with your thoughts. But one feels abandoned, the other feels sacred. One echoes, and the other one breathes. One reminds you of what you've lost, the other reminds you of what remains. And somewhere along the way, the silence changed. It stopped feeling like punishment. It stopped feeling like rejection. It stopped feeling like proof that nobody cared. The silence became a place where I could hear God again, hear myself, hear my own needs, my own dreams, my own voice. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe the goal was never to fill every room. Maybe the goal was to stop being afraid of the quiet because some houses are empty because nobody is there. But some houses become holy the moment you realize your presence is enough to fill them. And these days, when I hear the quiet, I don't rush to escape it. I sit with it. I pray in it. I rest in it. I grow in it. Because what once sounded like loneliness now sounds a little more like peace. The funny thing about silence is that if you sit in it long enough, it starts telling the truth, not about everybody else, about you. The dreams you put on hold, the boundaries you ignored, the needs you kept postponing, the parts of yourself you left behind while trying to carry everyone else. When I finally got quiet enough to listen, I realized something. There was someone waiting for me. Not a relationship, not a friendship, not validation. Me. And the truth is, the hardest conversation I ever had was with the version of myself I owed an apology to. This piece is called The Version of Me I Owed an Apology to. The hardest apology I ever had to make wasn't to a man, wasn't to a friend, wasn't to my family. It was to the version of me that kept waiting while I chose everybody else. I owe you an apology. Not because I stopped loving you, but because somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to you. You said you were tired. I told you keep going. You said your heart was breaking. I told you be strong. You said something didn't feel right. I called it loyalty. You asked for rest. I gave you responsibility. You asked for peace. I handed you another burden. I owe you an apology for every time I convinced you that surviving was the same thing as living, because it wasn't. And I see that now. I owe you an apology for every room I taught you to shrink inside of, for every time I told you to make yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger, for every boundary I let people cross, for every red flag I painted a different color, for every goodbye I should have honored instead of negotiating. I owe you an apology. Because you deserve protection too. And the truth is, I became so busy saving everybody else that I forgot you were drowning. I kept checking on them, praying for them, showing up for them, fighting for them, giving grace to them. Meanwhile, you were standing in the corner waiting for even a fraction of what I gave away so freely. And I never noticed. Not right away. Because pain has a way of becoming familiar. And familiar has a way of disguising itself as normal, until one day I looked up and realized I had spent years being loyal to people while absent from myself. That realization broke me, but it also freed me. Because apologies are powerful, not because they change the past, but because they acknowledge the truth. And the truth is, you deserve better from me. You deserve to be chosen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be protected. You deserve to matter. So today, I won't make any excuses. I won't blame my circumstances. I won't blame my heartbreak. I won't blame my fear. I'll simply say what I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left you waiting. I'm sorry I made you earn what should have been given freely. I'm sorry I treated your needs like they could wait until tomorrow. Most of all, I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. But hear me when I say this. I didn't come here just to apologize. I came to make a promise. I will listen now. I will protect now. I will honor now. I will choose now. And if the world asks me to abandon you again for the sake of being needed, being liked, being accepted, or being loved, the answer is no, because I've finally learned what you were trying to teach me all along. You were never asking to be saved. You were asking to be remembered. And I'm back now. So, after the version of me I owed an apology to, the natural question isn't, did she forgive me? The natural question is, can I trust her again? Can I trust the woman who left? Can I trust the woman who stayed too long? Can I trust the woman who doubted herself? Can I trust the woman who's standing here now? And the answer isn't immediate. Trust has to be rebuilt, even with yourself. This piece is called I Trust Her Now. For a long time, I wasn't sure. Not because she wasn't capable, not because she wasn't strong, not because she wasn't worthy, but because life had taught her to question herself, to second guess her instincts, to ignore what she knew, to ask everyone else what they thought before asking herself. For years, she stood at crossroads, holding the answer while searching for directions. She knew. God, she knew. And she knew when something wasn't right. She knew when a door was closing. She knew when her spirit felt unsettled. She knew when it was time to leave. But knowing and trusting what you know are two different things. So she stayed. She explained. She justified. She gave one more chance, then another and another. Not because she was weak, but because she was hopeful. Because she believed in people, because she saw potential, because she loved deeply. And sometimes people confuse softness with a lack of strength. They have no idea how much strength it takes to remain kind in a world that rewards hardness. But life has a way of teaching lessons until they become wisdom. And wisdom has a way of introducing you to yourself. So these days, when she feels something, she listens. When peace leaves, she notices. When a boundary is crossed, she responds. When God whispers, she moves. Not because she's fearless, because she's learned. I've watched her survive heartbreak. I've watched her start over. I've watched her leave what was familiar and walk toward what was necessary. I watched her carry grief without letting it carry her. I watched her rebuild when nobody would have blamed her for giving up. So no, I don't question her the way I used to. I don't silence her intuition. I don't dismiss her concerns. I don't ask her to prove herself anymore. She's already proven enough. That woman standing here today is not perfect. She still has questions. She still has scars. She still has moments when fear tries to speak louder than faith. But I've learned something. Scars are not evidence that you are broken. They are evidence that you healed. And healing changes you, not into somebody else, into someone wiser, someone gentler, someone stronger, someone who finally understands that peace is not something you find, it's something you protect. So when I look at her now, I don't see the woman who got it wrong. I see the woman who kept going, the woman who stayed standing, the woman who came back to herself, the woman that learned choosing herself was never selfish, it was necessary. And for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid of what's ahead because I know her now. I know her heart. I know her strength. I know her faith. I know what she survived. And after everything we've been through, there's something beautiful about being able to say, without hesitation, without apology, without doubt, I trust her now. Therapy complete.